Hi, this is Jeffrey Samuel Dakilanya, a development and crisis management professional, presenting to you Disaster Risk Awareness on behalf of LMCS as we celebrate the month of July as Disaster Preparedness Month. I will share with you today our perspective on the definition of disaster and risk, basic principles of preparedness, the risk management continuum, the IMI context, and things to do for threats of volcanic unrest. To a common Pinoy, a disaster usually refers to the impact of any natural calamity. To some, multiple deaths or injuries on an accident can also be considered as a disaster. However, for this presentation, we will focus on the United Nations definition, which states that a natural disaster is an unforeseen or sudden event. It causes destruction and human suffering, overwhelms local containment capacity, and would require external support or intervention from the national government or international institutions. A risk, on the other hand, is defined by a number of factors such as threats or hazards, which could be a natural disaster or a human-induced activity such as terrorism and civil unrest. Vulnerabilities, which refers to the state of an individual, a company, or an institution to be inflicted by harm. Exposure, which refers to the extent of being unprotected over time, and capacity, which is determined by the level of preparedness. Certain levels of these factors would make us estimate the level of risk that is in store for us. Not all kinds of hazards that are present can inflict significant harm or damage, as some institutions have different vulnerabilities and resources to ward off threats or its impacts. By considering these factors and their relationships, we would now be able to understand and manage the level of investment we need to prepare so we can protect our people, assets, and systems once we get exposed to a certain hazard. Remember the story of the three little pigs? They all lived on a place with the same threat, coming from the mere presence of the big bad wolf. They have the same exposure to risk of being eaten, but they have different levels of risk because they built their houses differently. Can you determine who assessed the threat best? Who is the most vulnerable? And who is the most appropriately capacitated to ward off the risk? I believe we all have the same answers. We all know that prevention is better than cure. So like the youngest pig in the story, we should know the basic principles of preparedness, and it all starts with situational awareness. Create an inventory of all threats and hazards we observe in our area and determine their likelihood and severity of impact, from which we could relate certain limitations and vulnerabilities we or our institution has. The country has a well-defined season and monsoon systems, so it's easy to identify our exposure to typhoons. Yet, the experience of Ondoy on September of 2009 highlighted our limitations to understand exposure to other weather impacts such as flooding. Thus, we failed to determine other risk factors. The next step to awareness is to use the knowledge and learnings to develop our capabilities towards more proactive and preventive levels. Capacity building for disaster preparedness should be as comprehensive and extensive, starting from individual levels up to institutional levels. It is also interdepartmental, as each units have their special roles to play, from being a safety ambassador to technical teams such as communications, medical emergency, and response teams. Logistics and supplies management during an emergency, on the other hand, would ensure sustainability of our mitigating measures, whether we are sheltering in place, or outside conducting rescue missions. To better understand the sequence of preparations and response, we need to understand the risk management continuum. Control Risk and Forbes Calamity Prevention had devised the diagram showing evolution of measures by which we based the evolution of types of controls that we need to incorporate in our risk management program, namely preventive controls, mitigating controls, and recovery controls. Preventive controls can start from designing our social systems, such as manpower levels, shifting of work and workflow systems, to engineering and environment designs. Mitigating controls, on the other hand, is focused on response when the incident already occurred. At the onset of an event, when preventive measures fail, time and speed of response to apply mitigating measures is very critical, as this would spell the timing for the application of recovery measures, including business continuity and normalcy of operations. An ineffective mitigating response would mean a more expensive and delayed recovery and continuity. Now that we learned the process, let's look into the geographical prevailing threat and actual operational context at IMI today. It is important to know the real-time parameters that we are dealing with if we need to formulate a robust and up-to-date risk management program. Situated at Laguna, geographical features of the country in general and the local characteristics of the province will describe what are the actual threats IMI faces. We all know that typhoons regularly visits the region, and having a generally plain topography, the area can be prone to flooding and violent runoffs. Since early 2020 up to recently, the pandemic and Taal volcanoes increased unrest and seismic activities pose different risks to IMI people, assets, and operations. Taal exposes IMI to risks ranging from quakes to ashfall and respiratory issues, as the area is at close proximity to Taal. The pandemic, on the other hand, continued to haunt us from the uncertainty of asymptomatic transmissions to something as serious as a deadly flu. Deeper into the contextual vulnerabilities of companies in the area, such as IMI, risks to life is always the main concern, and this is determined now by the employee density and level of operations. The more people and extensive the operation is, the more there will be risks. Therefore, more preventive and mitigation measures would be required. At present, IMI observes safety measures mandated by the national authority and implements diligent procedures to keep a lean workforce to reduce the risks. This virtual flag raising event, to me, is already a simple but meaningful gesture showing the company's drive to be productive and keep work for its people while observing safety. Due to limited time, we will now jump into the more important event that looms around the IMI complex: the recent Taal volcano unrest and disturbances. While the FIVOX is very active in releasing advisories about the event, their focus and interest is very wide and general, which may not be totally directed and beneficial to IMI's specific emergency needs. It is highly recommended that IMI emergency management stakeholders establish their own monitoring and escalation systems that are specifically customized on their risk context. Alert levels issued by the FIVOX are the best baselines for an initial assessment, but wind direction and air quality monitoring will ensure that IMI keeps track of actual risk in the area or along the travel routes of their employees. Last June 28, the confusion about the VOG or volcanic fog and smog or smoke and fog that were suspected to cause the hazy sky in Metro Manila highlighted the need for companies to triage or verify the observations in a more data-based approach. There are easily accessible websites that can show wind direction and air quality in a chosen location. We can recall that the highest alert level we had recently was alert level 3, which means that the danger zone could extend from 7 kilometers to around 8-kilometer radius. But the air quality in Metro Manila was already affected and people were advised to wear N95s when necessary. Early last year, Alert Level 3 escalated to Alert Level 4 within a few hours and extending the danger zone to around 14-kilometer radius around Taal. Wind direction and strength may widen the dispersal of volcanic debris further. If established indicators are met, this should be enough for the IMI Incident Management Team, IMT, or Crisis Management Team, CMT, to convene and start assessing and reviewing their plans and courses of actions. In case the risk is found to be imminent, more deliberate options should be available and ready to be implemented. In summary, a good program should be risk-based so that we can focus and prioritize on problems that can cause real harm. Data-driven so that we can be sure of the information that we are processing and communicating to our stakeholders. And customer-oriented so that the services we deliver are focused on the needs of our people, since they are our primary customers when it comes to personal welfare. On behalf of LMCS and for the IMI family, thank you very much and stay safe.